Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Atherton with Efficient Property Assistance and founder of the YYC Rental Housing Providers Group. We did just actually have our live session tonight, but I thought I would just come on and do a brief recording of some of what was shared tonight. You'll miss all the live Q&A and some of the great chat that we had. So please do try to make sure and come on live when you can. We're going to try to do these every month. So I'd like to see some more posts in the group, some more interest. And so essentially, I'm just going to do a quick recap and share my screen on what we went through tonight. So I was asked tonight to get into the tenancy gone wrong. So anyone that might know me at all, that's actually the opposite of who I am. I usually like to share about all the great things and talk about how fantastic it is to be a landlord, and I really enjoy what I do. But I do realize that it is important to share the risks and the details. So I'm coming on tonight to share very specific details that we've experienced in the last year. So all the stories are real stories, real people, and what happened in the last year in COVID. I've actually got from May 2020 to May 2021 in our experience here. So what we'll do is I'll just kind of recap where we're at and kind of what we were doing tonight. So with that, our meeting agenda is, so obviously welcoming and introductions for everybody is important. So again, I'm Laura Atherton with Efficient Property Assistance. I am a landlord. I'm Calgary based of over 12 years. I care about providing solutions and services and support to other landlords so that we can achieve the most success. My husband and I have, with our most recent purchases, probably just hitting 35 doors in Calgary. And with our support service, we've probably assisted over 100 landlords in their properties over the years in becoming successful. So that's where I'm coming from today. And it's hard for me to share the negative sides of things, but it's important that we all know each aspect of it. So we'll get into our types of tenancies, the types of tenancy endings. I'm going to share those real life examples as I discussed. Obviously, I'll have some closing comments and offers, and because this is a recording, you won't get the live Q&A that we just had, but you certainly, hopefully, will get a lot out of it. I'd love to see, even as I post this on our Facebook group in the chat, is if people would share a little bit. So I'll ask you throughout my recording here to maybe make some comments, and if you could respond, and we can keep the conversation going. I think it's most important that we're supporting each other, especially during these times now. But always, most of us in the group are small landlords. I know a lot of people are even just thinking about starting their real estate career, might have 1 or 2 doors. Some of us with a few larger portfolio wouldn't be here with the support of our community. So without further ado, I'm going to talk specifically about, so the 4 types of tenancies endings that I'm going to discuss. Now with that, I'm not going to talk about the good ones. So obviously you could just have a tenancy that ends because it's the end of their lease and they've moved on, they've bought a house, I mean, they've had new babies and need a bigger space. We're going to go through the ones that aren't expected. So the way I see the 4 that aren't expected is a lease break, an abandonment, an eviction where the tenant leaves, and an eviction where the tenant stays, and you have to do a full court process. And I will give the full details on the court process. I'm going to give the full details throughout this whole piece. So the way I see on the lease break is I actually see 2 types of lease break. And what I'd be wondered, and I'd love to see even some of you share in the chat after you watch this, is what type of lease do you have? And what do you have in your current lease as far as a break? Do you have an opportunity? Is there a charge in your lease? With a fixed term tenancy, what does that look like? Our standard lease break is a 1-month free rental. So our standard lease break is that with proper notice, a 1-month free rental fee, and cooperation, because they are responsible to pay the lease and the monthly rent until a new tenant is found. The other type of lease break, of course, is an immediate no notice. If there's no money, there's no money. If they're literally leaving, it kind of is what it is. Abandonment to me is a lease break without communication. So abandonment would be the tenant breaks their lease, but they just didn't tell you at all and they took off. So I'll stop the share for a minute just for you guys to see me so I can talk about these specific stories, because these are real people that I'm going to be sharing about and real life stories. I'll talk a little bit about intention as well, because it's not, I don't believe in any of these situations I'm going to share about tonight that it's anyone's intention to do ill. I don't think we set out to do that. So in the first lease break experience that I'm going to share about, I'm going to go from easiest to worst tonight on our lease breaks right through to our full court evictions. And so the first one occurred, and so this would have been May 1st of 2020. So just into the start of COVID. Definitely was loss of employment due to COVID. So loss of work. These guys loved this home. They had signed on for a 15 months lease. And then 5 months later, or I guess really only 3 months later, everything changed. And then they couldn't hold on anymore with loss of job. I would call this a no notice lease break, because by the time they communicated with me, it was over. They had to leave. So the May rent wasn't paid. They advised that they weren't going to pay it, and that they had lost jobs, and that they would have to be moving back home with family. So in this, even though it was short notice, there was some cooperation for us to be able to be aware, show the property. This unit was re-rented at $150 a month higher with no lost time. So it was re-rented by June the 1st. We did not receive any lease break fee. They didn't have any funds. We didn't get into that. And we weren't looking at making it harder for people. The lease break fees aren't there, and that could be a discussion later as well. They're not there to make it harder on people. They're there to make it serious, that people just don't break their lease willy-nilly. Okay, so it's kind of a little bit of a situation that I look at that way. I'm going to give you the dates and the details. I'm going to run through this fairly quickly because I did just do it live. But please know that you can reach out to me for any questions at any time. We are here. This is why I have this group, is to support you. So the next lease break, I would also say would be as a result of COVID, but a little bit of a different situation. I don't know if any of you had an experience where you may or may not have started to get tired of your loved one by being cooped up too long. But this lovely young couple in a basement suite, unfortunately, were breaking up. And so they gave the notice in September. They did not have the rent. They paid half the rent. So we had half the rent paid, and we had a holdback of half the rent. Unfortunately, they didn't leave the place in perfect condition, but within that, they still managed to get about $250 of their security deposit back. So to me, that was successful. They moved out the end of September, and it was re-rented for October 1st. And with this one, it was re-rented, so no lost time, and at $55 a month higher. So you can see kind of our norm in that we're not also trying to make money out of it, but we are still running a business. And through this, it's the unfortunate facts are some people struggled, whereas other people actually were continuing and doing quite well. And people still needed a place to live. And we were very much available throughout this process. We were willing to make adjustments. We did video interviews, Zoom meetings, video walkthroughs, anything that it took. We have all online systems and services. So we're really trying to be a service for people, regardless of the situation. What I'll share about a lot tonight about too is that we're people first, pet and family friendly company. And it's important to me that we always lead with our values while running our businesses. The last one for the lease break was probably one of the harder ones, and it was my most recent. So this was just last month, and completed for the end of April. And it was a lease break with cooperation as a result of a death in the family. And so in that situation, it's very, very difficult. We wanted to be able to cooperate with the family as much as possible. Unfortunately, they'd already been struggling with the rent. So they were already a month and a half rent behind. And we had been trying to work with them. And then the unfortunate situation occurred. They weren't able to continue on because the family member had been sharing in the rent with them, living in the residence, and they needed to find a cheaper space. Due to everyone working together though, this one for lost funds was about 1 month's rent was lost overall, but it was re-rented May 1st, so no additional lost time at $75 a month higher. So again, with that cooperation, we're finding a way to be able to continue and work with people. So when thinking about these things, I'll just share back into, again, a mix between a lot of situations in a lease break is because something's happened. This is pre-COVID, but many times it is job loss, a breakup, a death in the family. Again, this is not ill intent. these things happen in life, and sometimes our tenants don't have any savings or anything to fall back on. So by having good communication with them, the unfortunate side on the abandonment is that some people just don't have the ability to handle the conflict, to handle the adversity, to share what's happening for them. We've seen a lot of experiences with mental health issues, stress, and depression in this past year. And so unfortunately, in our case of abandonment, this also is a relatively recent circumstance, and it was a long-term tenant that had been a really good relationship. So it was a shock. And I think in this aspect, the owner had decided to sell the home, and they decided to move ahead of time. So there was quite a bit of lost rent because the lease was actually for a couple more months, and they'd left without notifying. We're also not going to re-rent it because it's for sale. You would say that communication should have been held, but in these circumstances, sometimes people just don't have the ability to do it. They don't have anything left. We try to have good communication with our tenants. They will talk to us. There's only so much that people can do in many situations. What I'll share about next is evictions. So 2 types of evictions that I see, and quite frankly, there's actually 3, because the third one in here would be that they don't leave, they just pay the rent. So I actually see eviction as a process. It's an unfortunate process, but it's a process that if your tenant doesn't pay the rent. So what I'd ask everybody to think about is, what's your process right now if you don't receive rent on the 1st? So if you don't receive rent on the 1st of the month and it's Saturday, do you wait until Monday to reach out to the tenant? And then if the tenant doesn't call you back right away or text or email you back, is it Tuesday or Wednesday before you actually go by the door? That's 5 days potential lost. So what I want you to think about is, no matter what, if you don't receive rent on the 1st, my practice is to notify on the 2nd. Then if I don't receive a phone call or email back by the 3rd, I'm knocking on the door. So at the very least, if it is an abandonment, I found it as early as possible to mitigate it. For the most part, my hope is that we're going to solve it. We're going to communicate. They're going to let me know. We did tons and tons of payment plans with clients, very successful. So I'm sharing all the unsuccessful stories tonight, but we had many, many successful tenancies where we work with people on payment plans. Our policy is, if your rent is not paid and a payment plan not made by at least the 5th of the month, we are going to serve the 14-day notice. So that 14-day notice, to me, is a policy. It covers us in the event that they don't pay the rent, but the goal is that they do pay it. Unfortunately, sometimes they don't and they just leave, which is still better than the latter part. So I'll share with you a couple circumstances of evictions that we had. The first one, again, another really difficult one to my heart. This one, tenant vacated August the 9th of 2020, but unfortunately at that point had been 4 months behind in the rent. This was extremely long for us. It was an extremely hard case with a single mom on student services, and when COVID first hit, it wasn't as organized on the funding right away. So those first few months of her school being on and off again, she basically wasn't qualifying for either the student CERB or the regular CERB because she hadn't worked, and it was really a struggle. We worked with her a lot on trying to get the right funding, giving her extensions and support. And unfortunately, and this happens as well, as if it gets too far behind, there's just nothing left. And so once she'd managed to get too far behind, the loss on this was $4,700. It's a very high loss of 4 months. The move out, she left finally on the eviction date, knowing that she couldn't come up with the funds at that point. She just felt too far behind, unfortunately, even though we tried to make different type of payment arrangements with her. We did re-rent the unit effective August 22nd. So I want you to hear some of how fast, when you're thinking about the fears and finding new tenant, that's not been an issue that we've been having. If you provide excellent service, you have no issues finding new tenants. So we managed with an early move-in. So it's not going to be a lot to recoup that $4,700, but we got $300 at least recouped for August, and we re-rented the unit at not a lot higher. This is a basic basement suite, but it went for $20 extra a month. The other circumstance that I'm sharing on the eviction when the tenant leaves, this one was also fairly recent in March of 2021. This was a circumstance of what I feel like, unfortunately, was an unsuccessful tenancy placement. I'm not saying there wasn't any effect on income as a result of COVID, because there was, but definitely there were other issues present because the rent just couldn't be paid on time every month. Multiple excuses, continued many conversations to get the rent paid. Many. If you want to message me later, I could share a few of the stories with you. Quite a few really extreme stories started to come my way. So at the end of the day, the eviction was served. On this one, it was again about a loss. This one was a loss of 1 month's rent, so about $1,500. We suspected possible other or drug-related issues happening on the province, unfortunately. It was re-rented with no lost time again, so this is re-rented the very next month. So the tenant vacated would have been at the end of March, and we actually had somebody in for the beginning. Well, I guess they vacated from their lease. Their eviction was March 16th, and we had a new tenant for April 1st at the same rent. So those are honestly those difficult stories, and I'll just kind of stop my screen to share with you guys for a minute. But those difficult stories, they all have human components to it, and those were the easy ones. Those are the ones where people were at least communicating with us to leave, or at least leaving. And in the other side is we actually had two very unfortunate stories where people refused to leave. So I'm going to go through all the steps. I don't know how many of you have been through a court process before, and I'm going to share two of our court processes. The first one, and I think the dates are really important that I'll get into with you, is the first one. We submitted this March 16th, 2020. So I believe that might have been 2 or 3 days, or maybe a week after we had just been closed for COVID for the first time. This was extreme. Those of you watching from other provinces or invest in different areas, in Alberta, we were never closed. There was never a moratorium on evictions. We were asked to work with people, and of course we would. But our tenant services was always open. Our residential tenancies dispute resolution service was open the whole time. I submitted this on March 16th. The court date I got was April 23rd. That seems to be the standard average that we've experienced here in Alberta of between 3 and 5 weeks. It's not ideal, but it's not as awful as we've heard some be. It's actually a very respectful process for both the tenant and the landlord. Interestingly, one of the other steps before this is generally what we've had, when we've ever had to file from the eviction that the tenant doesn't leave to actual court. In those circumstances, most of the time, 9 times out of 10, when I serve the court hearing date to the tenant, they leave. They usually leave before the court hearing date. They don't want to go to court. In this circumstance, and the other one that I'm going to share, they actually remain to stay. I believe that as a result of the media and the news in some of this circumstance, that they actually believe that they had the right to continue on and not pay the rent due to COVID. In this particular circumstance, I believe that this tenant had no change in their income. They had been habitually late for the rent. We had had constant communications. We had worked with other agencies to help and support them in getting their rent paid, and they had continuously been late on the rent. When COVID hit, I believe that they saw this as an opportunity to stay longer rent-free, and would probably be the closest we've had to a professional tenant. So in this circumstance, we had the court order on the 23rd. They actually attended court, actually fought to the judgment to say that they were going to pay the rent and they wanted to stay. So what was provided was a conditional order. This is something that's provided quite often in the event that they want to obviously salvage people's housing. So they were provided a conditional order to pay, so much money on so many dates. And with a conditional order, if you haven't had one before, the requirement, you already have one if they miss a date. You don't have to go back to court. So they're given a court order of the dates and the amounts to pay. If they're late on one of those days, it's a 7-day notice to vacate. This tenant had never been successful in payments before, and unfortunately wasn't successful again, and was given the 7 days to move, and then she left. So she did leave after that period. This was fairly costly. All in all, these costs was probably almost $3,000 to the owner. That would be the lost rents, the amount that we were behind. We also had outstanding of June due to cleanup and things needing to be required, so that we lost an extra month's rent there due to the timing. Court filing fees and all costs overall was about just under $3,000. It was re-rented for $50 higher starting July 1st. So the conditional order was April 23rd. She left after the 7 days of that. So let's say for May 1st. And so we lost June, was vacant in order to do the cleanup. Again, for any of these details, I know I'm going fairly fast on this recording, please let me know. That's what I'm sharing all of this to reach out. I'd love to see people sharing in the chat with each other on how we can support each other through these. The last one that I'm going to share tonight is probably the hardest experience. So this circumstance is the first circumstance in my entire career that has gone to this. And honestly, I would have rented to these tenants again. In some of these stories, I could tell you, yes, did I see some potential issues? Did I know there was a little bit of risk and we maybe went out on a limb for somebody or worked too hard to work with someone? This family was familiar to the community, had 2 beautiful daughters. There was nothing that would have changed me from renting to them again. I see this as a real hardship in what we've seen in our communities in this pandemic, in this experience of mental health issues, bringing out drug addiction and other problems, loss of family members, and just real hardship that this family must have went through. They were struggling with the rent for sure. We submitted in October 19th for the initial judgment. Hearing date was on November the 12th. So on November 12th, we also received a conditional order. That conditional order was for the judgment of just under $4,000 with the payment dates, which I advised that they had not been able to be successful in the past. We'd really worked with them. I asked that they not put that in place, but they did. And after the first payment, it defaulted. Now, this is my first experience ever in a default to this level. When it first defaulted, it was also some story around, request to the court to get an extension or an adjustment on the date. This is, just before a weekend. I've got to try to call into the court to find out if this is the case. I finally, reached the court. So now 4 or 5 days has gone by and find out that that's not something that's possible. And part of this was playing games, that they had heard information that if we didn't serve something within a period amount of time of their default, that they wouldn't be evicted. So they actually believed fully that as a result of these stories that they weren't going to have to leave. The steps that I want to share as well. So if anyone's had experience in going to RTDRS court systems, so the filing for us here in Alberta is $75. There's extra fees if you use an agent like me or any other, support services. You have to also serve. So once you've filed, right now we can file online, or we've been able to do that for quite some time, even pre-COVID. We can file online. Then when we get our hearing date, we have to print the right number of copies to be able to provide, depending on the number of tenants. That has to be served. Once that's served, you have to do an affidavit of service. You have to go back to the court to make sure you filed your affidavit of service. Once your hearing date is filed, then you have, when you provided you get an order, then that order, regardless of type, conditional or otherwise, has to then be stamped at the Court of Queen's Bench. You have to take the order from the Residential Tenancies Dispute Service and have that stamped on the Queen's Bench, and then you have to serve that again. And that's a step that a lot of people miss, including us. It wasn't that we didn't know it, it's that you think that you're thinking the best interest that the tenant is actually going to follow through. They've just come to court and said they're going to pay. Things happen very quickly. So we made sure to have that filed. In this circumstance, the tenant believed that because that hadn't quite yet been served, and then they defaulted, and then we took 5 days to serve on the default because of their excuse around making the adjustment, that they no longer would have to leave. This was not the case. This was the first circumstance where we had to ever bring in a bailiff. The bailiff attended on December 3rd. And the bailiff goes and attends. They're negotiating and working with the family to get them to leave. They can be forced out. The locksmith is there to change the locks, but they're trying to negotiate for them to leave, take some of their belongings, and not have the police have to come to force them out of their home. This is devastating. It took a few hours and the tenants did agree to leave, but it's not done yet, because this is now the circumstance where the tenants, all of their belongings are in the home. If you look at the next part of the Tenancies Act, all of our requirements are anything over $2,000 of belongings has to be held for 30 days. We have to inventory all of the belongings and hold for 30 days. It's an entire home of items. We then have to make arrangements with the tenants to be able to get their belongings. So we have to be able to have supervised attendance, and thinking about packing up a whole house and the amount of time that takes. This was huge. Now you're talking about the lost rent that we already had going into the month of December for another month lost rent, looking at 30 days. By the time they removed their items was completed on January the 8th. There's still cleaning and maintenance to be done. The total cost of this was just under $10,000. That's including your court, bailiff, move out, inventory, full cleaning, maintenance, supervising the tenants move on numerous occasions to have them pack and remove their belongings. But that's a big hit. That's a big hit for any landlord. That was a big hit for the family. I don't know how to say how this wouldn't have happened, but I would like to share it in at least the main thing. Two things would be a respectful process, being on top of things as quickly as possible. The tenants didn't make major damage, but it was a cost of time because they didn't believe that they'd have to leave. And some of that, again, was how things are portrayed through our systems. We did re-rent it for February 1st at a $250 more a month re-rental. So it will take a while to recoup over $10,000, but we did manage to increase and get another nice family in. These are the risks of being real estate. I like to, again, to talk about all the years and years of successful tenancy. One of the big pieces I talk about too is vacancy rates. So how are you managing in your own systems to make sure that you put in the right amount? So we account 8% of vacancy rate, which basically equates to one vacant month per year. So if you've had the property for 10 years or more and have never had a month vacant, I don't want you to have this cost, but in the event that you do, you can manage it. I want you to be able to have the planning for things like that. Our goal is to not have vacancy. Our goal is to not have something up to 10,000, but they do occur. So I wanted to be able to share that with you tonight. I'll just close off here with finishing my presentation. Obviously, we won't be doing the live Q&A, but I did want to just connect as well. I know we've got lots of new members, that you understand what our support service is here for. We're not a property management company, we're landlords. And so what we do, we provide coaching programs. I do one-on-one coaching like this on Zoom. I've got lots of bad stories or funny jokes, or maybe they're not so funny. We really want to provide the support services for the self-managing investor. We do provide forums and services and different avenues to help you support every step of the way through your rental process, including maintenance resources that we share here. We provide administration and tenant service placement support and all of that. We also, of course, do joint venture options where, if you want to help mitigate your risk even more, you can work directly with us. And we've had some fantastic success stories there. So just knowing that we're here and we're here to share. Again, I want to thank everybody for watching the video afterwards from the live, and let's chat more in the Facebook group. I'd like to hear more from you. We'd like to start doing this once a month. So please invite any of your friends or anyone else, because this is really hopefully a resource for all of us to be successful. And I hope you learned a lot tonight, and have a great evening.